From the KPFK studios in Southern California,
it's the Ralph Nader Radio Hour.
Stand up, you've been sitting way too long.
Welcome to a special holiday edition of the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. I am Steve Scrovan with David Feldman and, of course, the man of the hour, Ralph Nader. And this episode is going to be devoted mostly, not entirely, but mostly to your listener Facebook questions. So if you've submitted a question on Ralph's Facebook page, this is the show for you. Let's get started, shall we? Ralph, this is a question from Mr. Felix Romero. First, he says, "Hello, Ralph. My question for you is, what do young people, a.k.a. millennials, do about the lack of cooperation in Congress and the lack of voter participation that stems from my own generation?"
They can have a lot of fun by starting a letterhead organization of millennials to reform Congress, get more and more to sign on, start having meetings, which can be social events as well as political events, start learning how to influence Congress by reading some of the manuals that we have, and others have put out, how to put on news conferences, how to build coalitions, decide what they want to hold their members of Congress accountable for, like student loan reform or climate change or corporate crime enforcement or consumer protection, any number of issues, full health care. And once you reach a certain stage, and you'll know it when you reach it, with a good internet connection, you announce that you want to invite your senators and representative to a town meeting. You tell them what the agenda is. You tell them, unlike most millennial voters who vote at 1 out of 4, you're going to vote over 90%, and you mean business. And you tell them the time, the place. You get a town hall, for example. Sometimes City Hall provides free space, or a university auditorium or a high school auditorium. And in the process, you will start seeing your civic muscles growing, just like they would grow if you do exercise, if you do pull-ups or push-ups. And it's fun. Nobody can stop you from doing it. Your insignia can be the $2 bill, on one side of which is the meeting of those who came together to sign on July 4th, 1776, our Declaration of Independence. So each millennial that joins up, you can send them a $2 bill with the message, "Aren't we glad these people show up? It's time for us to show up and carry the mantle of civic patriotism and justice forward." No one can stop you from doing this except your own apathy, your own sense of powerlessness, and your own diminished significance, all of which you can eliminate.
Okay, Ken Cohen writes, what effective steps can be taken to stop poison for profit in the United States? This refers to GMOs, pesticide use, chemicals in the foods, illness-causing medicines, etc.
First, you've got to expose them and translate it into consumer rejection. So when you go into a supermarket and you don't like the producer of a product that pollutes a lot of water, you just refuse to buy it and put a little stickum on the shelf that says, so-and-so company is a polluter, do not stock your shelves with this polluter. You can't believe how they'll freak out on that. Anybody can stop you? No, nobody can stop you from doing that. The second thing you can do is write to your member of Congress with questions. Don't just say, I don't like this polluter, I don't like that polluter. Say, my information is that these companies are inflicting higher risks of cancer or respiratory ailment or property damage without being held accountable. And so I want you to answer the following 5 questions. And in the process, the staff back in the congressional office in Washington will have to educate themselves, because they know they can't brush you off. You're a voter. You can spread the word about their brushing you off. And just to make your point even stronger, you put a CC at the bottom of the letter and just put a whole list of people who are getting your letter. You can say interested parties. You can say the names of reporters or talk show hosts or potential opponents, so they know that you mean business. The third thing that they can do is push for criminal penalties for the corporate bosses. That's what gets the attention of the corporate bosses. Otherwise, the company becomes a buffer. They can absorb whatever slings and arrows of adverse reputation or fines and keep finding ways to use our air, water, soil, and food as their private sewers because they don't want to internalize these costs and change their own technology and their practices. There are so many good books on how to become an effective citizen. And what you need to do is look them up on the internet, start little citizen training courses in living rooms. You can have a lot of fun. I think justice is a lot more fun than looking at video games. I'm sure I'm in the minority on that one. But when you start making a better neighborhood, a better community, a better society, and you see how people react to you when you win or when you help save their lives, or improve their health, or better their education, or protect their children. It's hard to beat that in terms of human gratification.
Rob Reed writes, should we reform our anti-monopoly laws since they seem to protect them instead of prevent them?
Very much so. First of all, the problem with the antitrust laws, or the anti-monopoly laws, as the Inquirer called them, is they're out of date. They can't deal with corporate globalization. They can't deal with joint ventures between competitors. They can't deal with a lot of the intellectual property stuff. They can't deal with things like the Medicare payments to doctors are not determined by Medicare. That's farmed out to committees of doctors. And they may not have a disinterest in being impartial here. And if they all get together and recommend to Medicare that this operation and this procedure should be charged this much or that much, that's the kind of price fixing. And so we need to have congressional hearings updating the antitrust laws. We have very little interest in Congress. We need to educate the public about why competition is preferable to oligopoly, to monopoly, to shared monopolies, because you're paying more. You're paying more, you're getting worse products. You're getting shoddy products. You're getting your voice stuffed. It means a lot. Now, there is a pamphlet by the Federal Trade Commission explaining the antitrust laws. So write the antitrust division of the Federal Trade Commission, Washington, D.C. You don't need a street address. Ask them for their pamphlet. Or write the antitrust division of the U.S. Justice Department, Washington, D.C., and ask for their pamphlet. But the best thing is a 14-minute video, brilliantly done, by the American Institute of Antitrust here in Washington, D.C. Look it up, AIA.org probably, American Institute of Antitrust, and ask how you can get their prize-winning video explaining in clear language, but very accurately, why the antitrust laws mean something important to you, to your health, to your safety, to your economic well-being when you enter the marketplace to shop.
But that's kind of the paradox of the free market capitalist, is that they preach competition and then spend all their efforts trying to eliminate it and monopolize.
Adam Smith, over 250 years ago, wrote in his book exactly that. He said, watch out when businessmen get around the table. They're up to no good. They like to conspire to fix prices or to rig markets. Here is the champion of the free market, the invisible hand, the guru of conservatives, tremendously warning us about the penchant for business people to fix prices and rig markets.
So Adam Smith would be considered left-wing now.
Yeah, that's right. By the way, it's the American Antitrust Institute. I'm sorry, I said the American Institute of Antitrust. It's the American Antitrust Institute, AAI.org.
Michael Wolfman asks, why does our military need to be many times the size of the next largest military in the world? What does that buy us?
Well, the military budget in the U.S. government is equal to that of the rest of the world. All the rest of the world spending on military expenditures equal what we spend. That raises the question posed by the Inquirer. Indeed. Well, one reason is because military budgets are big business. And so this is why President Eisenhower, back in the 1950s, warned in his farewell address about the military-industrial complex, because the military budget is driven more by commercial profit of Boeing, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and other prime contractors. They want more contracts, and therefore they push for more fighter planes, submarines, aircraft carriers, missiles, you name it. the military budget is driven more by commercial demands of lobbyists swarming over Congress, pouring money into members of Congress and the two-party coffers, than it is by legitimate defense needs. Now, when you have a huge military budget and your main adversary has collapsed, the Soviet Union, in the early 1990s, how do you maintain that military budget without desperately searching and exaggerating new adversaries? And so that's what we've been doing. Iran is the most dangerous country in the world to our security. What an absurdity. The criminal gangs on 9/11, we've exaggerated, and by invading Iraq and blowing apart Afghanistan and droning here and there, we've metastasized them into all kinds of Al-Qaeda affiliates and ISIS in all kinds of countries, fighting the dictators that we prop up and fighting us and our soldiers and diplomats and tourists in these countries. That's the answer.
And it's something like half our budget, more than half our discretionary spending is on the Pentagon, and yet that doesn't include the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Well, it does, including the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. It's now over $800 billion, which is about half, if not a little more than half, of the budget for all the other government departments and agencies: Department of Agriculture, Food and Drug Administration, State Department, Department of Interior, Justice Department, you name it. There is no Western country in the world that comes close to that ratio. Not one comes close to that ratio.
And all of the deficit hawks, they never include the military budget in wanting to cut. They want to cut Social Security. They want to cut everything else, any other kind of social program, but very seldom the military.
They're budget sadists. They're cruel beyond being craven. These are legislators who will prefer cutting the food stamp program, the children's well-being programs, the health and safety laws so that people can breathe cleaner air, drink cleaner water, eat safer food, preserve the land, preserve the rivers and the lakes, before they will cut one surplus, unnecessary weapon system that is obsolete because there's no longer any Soviet Union, before they even cut one F-35 fighter plane, which isn't needed. They will cut to the bone the budgets that protect the American people.
And suddenly they're Keynesians because they think these planes are job creators. Do they create jobs? Are they good jobs? Are they union jobs?
They do create jobs, but nowhere near what similar money creates in the civilian economy. That is, if you spend $100 billion on the F-35 fighter plane, let's say, it will create less than 1/4 of the jobs that $100 million will create repairing our public works, our sewage, drinking water systems, highways, bridges, libraries, clinics, and prisons and other things like that.
I heard of a study, I think it was out of University of Massachusetts, where they said every $1 million spent on the military creates 12 jobs. Every $1 million spent on education creates 25 jobs, more than twice.
Not only that, but the second level jobs it creates even improves that ratio, Steve, because these people who are getting jobs in the civilian economy are spread throughout the country. They're going to spend that money, whereas the military contractors are highly capital intensive, highly concentrated in terms of salary and upper management. They are not that much of a stimulus as civilian consumers are from civilian salaries.
I dug up this quote from Dwight D. Eisenhower. Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies in the final sense a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and not clothed.
That was a spectacular speech, listeners. You can get it on your internet. President Eisenhower's speech in April 1953 before the National Society of Newspaper Editors in Washington, D.C.
Wow.
No other president has given a speech like that.
Wait a second, Ralph. With all due respect, sir,
Yeah.
most people would think I'd be quoting from his valedictory military-industrial complex speech. But how did you know that was April 16th, 1953?
Because it's a famous speech. No other president has made that contrast between what we dump in unnecessary surplus weaponry, and we got enough weapons to blow up the world 300 times. That's quite far beyond our defense needs. And where that money can go, building better schools, better mass transit, better clinics, modern libraries, the things that really make the quality of life higher in America. I'll never forget that speech because I was a sophomore at Princeton University and I heard it on the radio and I was very impressed by it.
Apparently, Ralph doesn't need the internet, but us mere mortals do. Because I was surprised because when I looked that up, I thought he only attacked the military-industrial complex on his way out of the White House. I didn't know he was doing it that early in his presidency.
He was fighting the Pentagon and the military-industrial complex every day of his presidency. He didn't win all the battles. He might have not won most of them, but coming from the military, he knew what the waste was. He knew what the contractors' greed was like. Enough is never enough. He knew what the bureaucracy was like. So he's pretty credible, I would say.
Wait a minute, but he's just another radical leftist like Adam Smith.
I'm sure. Well, it's interesting that that's the one speech that the military-industrial complex would never want to give the website for.
Our next question comes from, and I'm assuming this is a gentleman named Box Elder. It's a little bit more abstract, Ralph, more philosophical. He asks, why is paranoia so rampant in the U.S. lately? Is it a result of decades of lies from authorities, both political and media? Is an ignorance bubble about to burst?
Because a lot of people who are paranoid are actually accurate. After all, we now know that the NSA spies on everybody, your email, your telephone. So before we knew that, let's say 10 years ago, someone says, I think the NSA is spying on my telephone calls. And a friend says, you know, Jack, you're a paranoid. They're not saying it now.
Didn't they call you that back in the 60s when you were investigating GM? And turns out people were following you.
Yeah, I felt people were following me, and it turned out General Motors hired detectives to follow me to discredit my findings, asserting that their cars were unsafe and could be made safer at a reasonable cost to save lives. But I want to add something. You're erudite, gentlemen. What is the antonym for paranoia in the American language?
First of all, what is an antonym?
It's the opposite word.
I know what it is. I'm making a joke.
Okay.
Okay, what is the antonym for paranoia?
Yeah.
Boy, that's a good question. The opposite of paranoia would be...
I have no idea.
Come on, David. Okay,
yeah.
use your computer. Go to the dictionary of antonyms.
Well, that's cheating, but...
No, but I'll tell you. I don't think there is one. I'll tell you the word that my sister, Laura Nader, created for it. Okay.
Let me see. Synonyms, there is no antonym for it.
No antonym for paranoia.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
I feel better about being stumped on that one.
Okay. My sister, Laura Nader, who's taught anthropology at University of California, Berkeley, and has a course that's extremely popular with hundreds of students in the lecture hall.
Including my daughter.
Oh, isn't that interesting? Yes. Yeah, David Feldman's daughter. She teaches a course on controlling processes. And one of the things that's discussed is why do people trust these hucksters in the marketplace when they assure them all the things that aren't so? You know, the insurance salesman, the auto dealer, the rent-to-own racket, the payday loan rackets, not to mention the slick mainstream advertisers pushing over-the-counter medicines that don't work and so on television. And she finally came up with the word. I thought it's pretty cool. Trustanoia.
Trustanoia. That's the antonym for paranoia. I got that. Yeah. I was going to go with confidence or something like that. Mm-hmm. That's the first thing that struck me. But trustanoia.
Trustanoia. Spread the word and send it to Thesaurus next edition, David.
So trustanoia means you actually trust what's being told to you as opposed to...
No, trustanoia is a attitude by people who trust the assurances of others that are not true.
All right. Very good.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Webster's.
Great. Yeah. Thank you for that question, Box Elder, and I believe Steve Scrovan was in Skull and Bones with Box Elder's father, Pliny.
Clinton?
Oh boy, you got to
Wow.
have you got to have a classical education for that one.
Classical
bad.
education and
That's not bad. But if you had a million audience for that joke, maybe 10 would understand it. David.
I didn't even understand it.
Keep it up, Pliny the Elder.
yeah, you went that was so tortured. I'm going to put a report out on it.
I just
I think we're going to
waterboarded.
include that in the Dianne Feinstein report. That tortured joke. Do the next question, David.
Andy Schuler writes, Ralph, do you think states should replace the outdated single winner plurality electoral system, aka winner take all, with proportional representation for their legislatures as they do in 80% of Western countries?
And in some cities where you have city council people running at large instead of in neighborhoods by district. And therefore, for example, in Hartford, Connecticut, the top 7 winners, last I knew about this, the top 7 winners in the vote. So you can come in 7th and you're elected. That's proportional representation. San Francisco, I think, has it as well. I would like to see it because it makes more of your votes mean something. It isn't a winner take all. It doesn't create apathy and resignation, fatalism, because you win 48% of the vote, you get nothing. So I am for proportional representation.
I've been into a couple of parliamentary countries recently, both Israel and India. And when I talk to people there, they all complain, oh, there are too many parties. There are too many parties. What are are there downsides to having too many parties?
Yes, there can be in a parliamentary system, but that doesn't mean that if we have a proportional representation, that all the ills of a parliamentary system with 25 parties in a coalition that can break the coalition if 3 of them quit or whatever, there really aren't that many, but it wouldn't happen in this country. You could provide safeguards against that. But look what happens now. We have gridlock. They say, oh, look at Italy has gridlock. It has these coalition and parties. One of them can threaten to leave, collapse the government. We don't have to collapse the government. We just have Congress.
So you wouldn't be trading one system for the other with no difference. You're contending.
No, the key thing is it stops on election day. That is, you give people more voice and you'd have different candidates. It doesn't mean you have to have different parties. It's the parties that are the problem in these coalition governments where an entire government can fall because of one tiny, say, extreme party that they had to let in order to create a majority and create the government under the parliamentary rules they have.
So I'm not sure I'm understanding exactly what you're talking about. You're saying in our system, if we have multi-parties who are campaigning and therefore they influence each other and pull each other in different directions, but when the election is over, they don't form a coalition government?
No, because you see, we don't have a parliamentary system. In the
Right.
parliamentary system, when you have proportional representation and say 8 parties get a piece of the overall vote and they go over the minimum, then you see you have the prime minister who is a member of the parliament having to create a coalition government. You don't have that in this country because the president is elected independently and members of Congress are elected independently. Now, they may have to wheel and deal in Congress. For example, if you had 15 Green Party representatives in the House of Representatives and it's a close vote, the Green Party reps would have some leverage, but they wouldn't have leverage over the president. It's a different system.
Right. Let's take another question. Karen M. Sussman writes, and this kind of dovetails on what we were just talking about because it's about electoral politics. She wants to know, have you had the opportunity to meet and speak privately with either Senator Elizabeth Warren or Senator Bernie Sanders yet? And do you have an interest in working with either of them politically to help yourself or further their ambitions? If so, why do either or both of them appeal to you?
Well, primarily they appeal to me because they are very sharp and continual critics of corporate power, corporate abuse, corporate crime, corporate injustice in the healthcare area, environment area, the financial services area, banks, insurance companies, drug companies. They're very good. But It's very hard to reach Senator Bernie Sanders. I've been trying to call him to talk with him or meet with him for over 10 years, and he's never returned a call. I even wrote a column. You can get it on my website, nader.org, over a year ago, chiding him for being such a lone ranger. I mean, he can't get anything done, and we can't get anything done unless we and other members of Congress collaborate, meet with each other, strategize with each other. I've met with Senator Warren twice, once when she was in the Treasury Department and once as senator. She's very forthcoming, but she's got a lot of demands on her time, and it's very hard to get her with a clutch of citizen groups to plan long-range strategy. I have written a letter to 9 progressive senators, including these 2, saying they've got to get together into a caucus so they can have leverage in the Senate and be more credible with the media, because if they just go forward on issue this and issue that as lone rangers, they're going to be very frustrated. Well, it's been about 6 weeks, and I've not gotten an answer from any one of the 9 most progressive senators in the Senate, which proves my point. Lone rangers will never carry the day. They will carry the torch, but they will never carry the day to enactment.
Now, MoveOn.org just did a poll recently asking their members if they wanted that group to encourage Elizabeth Warren to run for president, and 81% voted yes.
They would vote yes because their constituency is more liberal than usual. I am all for Elizabeth Warren and a lot of other progressives throwing their hat in the Democratic primary. Otherwise, we're going to have a very unhealthy coronation juggernaut on behalf of Hillary Clinton, a prime, seasoned, experienced corporatist and militarist, which is the last thing this country needs after President Obama leaves office.
Well, Howard Dean just came out in support of her. I mean, he's got a large mailing list, and Warren Buffett just gave $25,000 to the Ready for Hillary PAC. So people seem to be lining up behind old Hillary there.
They'll regret it if they're successful. Maybe their motivation is simply that cancer is worse than deadly tuberculosis. And so they're taking an extreme least of the worst. I can't imagine Howard Dean, knowing what he stood for, would support Hillary Clinton unless he's looking for a cabinet level job.
Very quickly, I wanted to ask Ralph how many hours a day he reads, when he reads, and how much of his reading interrupts his binge viewing of Netflix.
Well, that's a good question because it deals with input and output, how much you absorb and then how much you produce. I have to read 3 newspapers very carefully because I mark them for other people here and around the country, various articles and features, because I know that a lot of them don't read those newspapers, Washington Post, New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal. And I try to read some books, every page. But if you're going to cover the waterfront, you got to learn how to skim books. And books are readily skimmable if they're well written, because usually in the introduction, they focus on the theme of the book. And in the conclusion, you get a good summary. So I suspect that I spend maybe 30 hours a week just reading. On the other hand, I work quite a bit more than 40 hours a week. So
how long does it take you to read the 3 newspapers?
It takes me about 2.25 hours to read the Washington Post, New York Times, and Wall Street Journal on any day except for Sunday. Sunday, I have to spend about 3 hours on the New York Times alone. It's a massive book. It's a 550-page book.
But you're not reading Sunday Styles, right?
I read every section. I don't read every word, obviously, but there's not a single section. Sports, arts, style, week in review, the A section. I read every section. I read through every section of the paper.
But this is very important to me. I have a system when I'm behaving where I say to myself, all right, I'll read the first paragraph of every story, and if it grabs me, I'll continue. But at least I will have read the first paragraph. Are you reading every word of the paper?
No, of course not. But sometimes you don't get the juice when you read the first paragraph. Actually, you might get the story, the human interest, but if you're reading op-ed, for example, it's very good to read the last 3-4 paragraphs. That's when they really come down to what the article is all about. Why do I read every section? Because if every section is important to a lot of people, like the sports section, the arts section, the style section, it's important to me, even though I don't particularly care for a lot of the material in those sections. I want to see what people are absorbing. And one of the impressions I get from the Sunday New York Times is a lot of the pages are designed for the top 1% of the richest people. I mean, when you look at the advertisements in the Sunday magazine section, I mean, who can begin to afford those products? You look at the style and arts and how much it costs to go see a Broadway play or to go see the New York Yankees play. So it's a very upscale newspaper, and I think they're making a mistake. They should spend more time on what's going on around New York City among the bottom 90%.
Well, let's get to more listener questions, because this is what this particular episode is about.
Well, I'm a listener.
Yes, but you also don't have your brain right now because you can't find your phone, so you're disqualified.
Which explains the Frankfurter joke.
Yes. Oh, and I can't believe Ralph repeated it and said it was good. I've lost respect for both of you.
It was only funny because I had the nerve to say that to Ralph. That's what made it funny.
Yes, exactly. It's the act of it, not the content.
Right.
All right. Let's get to some of your Facebook questions. Ryan Morris asks, what is Ralph's take on the Federal Reserve and quantitative easing? Ralph?
Well, that was hundreds of billions of dollars in the last 2 years where the Federal Reserve would buy bonds and some other financial paper in order to signal to Wall Street that the Federal Reserve has the back of the economy. It didn't create any jobs. And this funny money world that the Federal Reserve lives in, and if so few people understand, elicits a common sense question. Why don't they spend some of that money repairing America? Why do they spend all that money trying to reassure the bond market and make sure that Wall Street can borrow money at virtually no interest, while students have to pay 6% interest or more on student loans, and homeowners have to pay 3.5% to 4.5% interest on their mortgages? I think quantitative easing was a way for the Federal Reserve not to face up to the real problems of the economy and to buy time, hoping that the private economy would recover, having this kind of financial reassurance by the Federal Reserve.
It always strikes me that Wall Street seems, or the stock market in particular, is like a big baby that we're always trying to stick a pacifier in its mouth when it starts screaming and crying. And we're always trying to pacify it.
And it did pacify it in the sense that if the goal of the Federal Reserve was to jockey up the stock market, they did it. It went up over 400 points from the start of the quantitative easing to about 17,000 on the Dow now. So the people who make money off the stock market like quantitative easing. The point is, it's like a narcotic. And so the addiction is such that if the Federal Reserve even mentions at some of its meetings that it is going to start to allow interest rates to rise, the stock market will take a real jolt downward, just like when you try to take someone off an addiction like tobacco or alcohol, there are consequences. So historically, I don't think it's one of the Federal Reserve's proudest moments by any means.
Well, I'm going to put on my hair shirt for doing the Felix Frankfurter joke and read this question for Elizabeth Shepard. From Elizabeth Shepard. How can we break the silence on Israeli war crimes and ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, especially in Congress?
There's a simple answer that nobody's ever given. What you do is you get some of the two-state supporters in the U.S., including prominent Jews, who want to solve this conflict. And you get them to start a project where they invite former heads of the Shin Bet and Mossad and the Israeli Knesset and former ministers of justice and leading intellectuals and former mayors who cannot stand the repressive Israeli policy toward Palestinians that they've been witnessing, and they've spoken out in Israel, where you can have more of a discussion about this than you can have in the United States, and bring them over to a congressional hearing in the House and Senate. That will break the grip of AIPAC that taboos the members of Congress and will give cover to members of Congress. I mean, let's see if AIPAC can say to members of Congress, no, don't you dare, for the first time in 60 years, invite the head of the Israeli FBI's retired, the head of the Israeli CIA retires, who want peace and want a two-state solution, who have spoken out on it, who've criticized the Israeli government, who have had press conferences, but are never invited to nourish American foreign policy in terms of open public hearings by the Senate and House Foreign Relations Committee. Once that's done, you will indeed break the silence,
Right.
and good things will flow from that.
There's a great documentary where they interviewed all the leaders of the Shin Bet, and
Yeah, it's called The Gatekeepers, and you can get it off Netflix. And I'm telling you, these people I mentioned over there, they would jump in a moment to come over and testify, because there's been a total blackout of their views, which are supported by millions of Israelis, of their views before the U.S. Congress. That's why I called the U.S. Congress a puppet show for the pro-Israeli government repression of the Palestinian people and its inordinate influence over the U.S. Congress and the White House that has been chronicled in many books and articles and exposés.
it's almost as if we're only getting the Likud party's story. It would be like the rest of the world only hearing from the Republicans when the United States is talking.
Yeah, the extreme Republicans, too, because there are multi-parties in Israel that are a broad spectrum of political views toward the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and toward the economic policy toward the poor in Israel. I mean, Israel has a similar hierarchy of oligarchs and inequality and poor workers that need to be addressed and will be more addressed if the Israeli government cannot distract the Israeli public on the Palestinian issue. So the internal politics of Israel is very much connected to the intransigence of the Israeli government, delaying year after year and facing up to what the majority of Palestinians and Israelis want, which is a two-state solution and a security agreement.
Well, we're on a roll here. Michael Wolfman asks, is Rupert Murdoch more powerful than the president?
Well, obviously not, but I think the inquirer is trying to raise the broader question. Does Rupert Murdoch have too much control over the mass media in terms of market share, in terms of propaganda, in terms of sensationalizing the media and misinforming the American people, and in terms of his pro-corporatist Wall Street type bias? And the answer is yes. He came out of Australia with successful commercialization and debasement of some Australian newspapers. He goes to England, he does the same in England, and then he sees the big honeypot of the U.S., and he buys a New York newspaper, he buys and starts Fox Network, and he's immensely rich and immensely ruthless in terms of feeding people low sensuality news, cheesecake, sensationalism, rumors, celebrity news, and drains his media from constructive and important information. And so you see the slant on Fox News. Now, having said that, it may come to a surprise to people that I get more time on Fox Network, including the cable network, than I get on NBC, ABC, CBS combined.
Now, why do you think that is?
I think they want controversy. I think even though they have a right-wing take, they have a corporatist take, they're secure enough in knowing that if you put views like mine on uncensored, they're going to get more of an audience. In a sense, they're more clever marketers. And I don't pull any punches. I go after Republicans. I go after Bush. I go after Republican senators, McConnell, Boehner in the House. They're just smarter. The fact that I cannot hardly ever get on MSNBC and all the programs in the evening, you know, Chris Matthews, Christopher Hayes, and Rachel Maddow, illustrates that they do have a party line. They're traditional routine Democratic Party adherents. They don't want to hear the criticism from the progressive left.
And Murdoch, it turns out, doesn't believe most of the junk that's being spouted by Fox News, right? Doesn't he believe global warming is man-made?
He may, but down deep, he is a big business. He thinks corporatism is a good belief system, but he obviously has deviations that reflect an absorption of factual reality.
Great. Well, Randy Glassford writes, years ago, the book The Poisons in Your Food came out and greatly influenced my food choices. Why don't you release another updated to the 21st century? The public needs this knowledge from an expert in consumer protection. Seems the fight is not over.
I'm telling you, I'm not needed anymore in this area. There have been so many great books out by Michael Pollan, who writes also for the New York Times Magazine, by Eric Schlosser, by people who go on McDonald's diets for a month and then head for their physician. Remember that documentary?
Morgan Spurlock.
That's right.
Supersize Me.
And in terms of rigorous daily scientific disclosures that can help you decide what food to eat and what food not to eat, go to the organization called Beyond Pesticides, which has been around for many years. The website is beyondpesticides.org, quite simple. And for information on nutrition and subscribing to a great, hugely regarded newsletter called Nutrition Action, put out by the Center for Science and the Public Interest. You can get it every month. It's clear as a bell. It's extremely well documented and accurate, right down to fruits, vegetables, drinks. It's called CSPInet.org. That's Center for Science and the Public Interest net.org. But the website is CSPInet.org to get information and to get a gift subscription, I might add, during the holidays at a very, very modest subscription rate to the newsletter Nutrition Action.
Do you think McDonald's is going to go out of business?
Well, it's beginning to hurt. That's why they're diversifying their menu to provide for more vegetables and more disclosure. But I think it's so wedded to the fat, salt, and sugar diet, its core business. It's going to be hard to attract a growing body of people who want nutrition and don't want to buy food that kills them or makes them obese or gives them high blood pressure or early diabetes.
Their profits are really down, and Coca-Cola is not doing well.
Well, more people now are drinking water, bottled water. I hope it's safe, and not soft drinks. I remember when soft drinks superseded milk in terms of volume, and then it superseded water. But now water is coming back because it's being marketed in a much more convenient manner. And I think people are reacting to more and more scientific information that a can of Coca-Cola with 9 teaspoons of sugar, that's what it has, if you didn't know, 9 teaspoons of sugar, may not be good for you and not just your teeth. It may not be good for your body.
I had my first glass of Coke last week. It must have been 2 years since I just wanted to see what the fuss was about. And I saw the sodium content. The formula is genius.
It's addictive. It makes you want to have more Coke.
Right.
But you're too smart for that, David. One Coke every 2 years is enough.
But it is genius to put so much salt, and they cover the salt with more sugar. You can't taste the salt because of the sugar. So
same with ketchup. Okay, do you think when you have ketchup, there's salt and sugar in ketchup?
No.
There is a lot.
Oh yeah, a lot of sugar. Definitely.
Yeah, the processed food industry is a Goliath of camouflage and deception, and hooking young kids to it is basically an act of violence. And there are doctors and others who think that the exploitation of young children, bypassing their parents, direct marketing by fast food industry, junk drink industry, is shortening the lives and jeopardizing the health of millions of youngsters as they grow older. Fortunately, the warnings are out. There's a lot of information that wasn't around 20, 30, 40 years ago. And parents have got to become much more disciplinary with their children instead of saying, "What do you want?" And they're 4-year-olds and they say, "Coke." No, you're not going to get Coke. You're going to get orange juice.
Well, even that's poison.
Well, it depends. I mean, there's processed orange juice, there's fresh squeezed orange juice where you get organic oranges.
But the sugar content is so high. They're saying that you're much better off just eating an orange.
Yeah, eat the orange. If you squeeze it, you're not getting that much more sugar than if you eat the orange, David. You know, it's the same corpus. It's not processed. So get the Vitamax into your kitchen. Produce smoothies, a whole variety of fruits and vegetables that are like a milkshake, and it can be quite delicious. And there are dozens of recipes now for smoothies.
Well, let's do at least one more question here before we close out this episode. Vaughn Cooper writes, the 24 midterms gave us historic Republican gains in both the House and Senate. Is this the result of GOP gerrymandering after the 2010 census? Will the trend continue until the next census in 2020? And will 2020 will be the same since the elections will be based on the 2010 census district lines? In 2012, Democratic candidates for the House received over 1 million more votes than Republicans, yet Republicans kept the majority. Is this our long-term future? Gag me with a spoon.
There's a lot in that question. And very quickly, gerrymandering does ensure the reelection of incumbents, and the Democrats do it and the Republicans do it, except now the Republicans, starting in 2010, controlled more governorships in state legislatures who draw these electoral districts and gerrymander them than the Democrats. If the 2016 and 18 elections displace a lot of these Republican governors and state legislatures, they will be able to gerrymander more to make re-election a slam dunk for the Democrats. But I think gerrymandering, while it's real, it can be exaggerated as an excuse for the debacle last month by the Democratic Party. They had a record to fight against by the Republican parties. It was the worst in the Republican Party history. Anti-children, anti-women, anti-peace, pro-war, pro-Wall Street, pro-corporate tax loopholes, anti-minimum wage, you name it. They had all these issues that the Republicans were in the distinct minority in the public opinion polls, but they're dialing for the same commercial dollars, you know, from the Walmarts and the McDonald's and others. And so they tied their hands behind their back and went into the battlefield against the Republicans with plenty of money on both sides and were slaughtered. They lost big. And so I blame the Democrats. I think the Republicans won by default. They should have been landslided by the Republican Party. You don't win without a message. You don't win by being a metronome, you know, where people don't know where you stand. You're wishy-washy. You're always backing and filling, like the Republican, like the challenger in Kentucky, Miss Grimes, who refused to say whether she voted for Obama or not. She could have beat the present Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell. She could have beat him. He was not popular in the polls. He's a bad campaigner. He had clever ads. Some of them were funny. He had local ads showing where the pork he brought back to Paducah, Kentucky, etc. But she should have beat him. She had a huge ground game in Kentucky. Her father was a seasoned politician who knew all kinds of people in Kentucky. And she started out with a winning potential, but she didn't know how to be an Elizabeth Warren. She didn't know how to really be forceful on minimum wage and bring it down to 400,000 Kentucky workers who make less today in inflation-adjusted wages than the workers made in 1968, 46 years ago. She slobbered in front of the coal industry, which is a dying industry in Kentucky and polluting industry in Kentucky. She should have come out big for solar energy. That's where the big jobs are, installing solar panels, for example, and all over Kentucky. So she lost, and she lost by almost 10 points.
Mitch McConnell says that Keystone is going to be his first priority when he becomes Senate Majority Leader. Meanwhile, Louisville, Kentucky is heating up faster than any city in America. Are they going to approve the Keystone, or is cheap oil going to make that irrelevant?
Well, it has to be approved first by the State Department, John Kerry, and then by President Obama. My guess is Obama is beginning to turn against it, although a year ago, I would have said he's going to approve it after the 2014 elections. After Cuomo banned fracking, the collapse of oil prices, the expression by the Canadians that they're going to sell this oil anyway, either by exporting it or by shipping it on railroads to East Canada and into the U.S. My guess, he's getting ready to make an argument that it not only is environmentally devastating, but it's not necessary.
Are we going to have cheap oil for a long time?
Don't bet on it, David. Cheap oil means more guzzling cars and trucks. Cheap oil means more consumption of oil. The cartels will start pulling back on production, and they'll increase the price of a barrel of oil. They won't go up to 120, but I wouldn't be surprised that over the next year it goes back from the $57 it is now up to $80, $90. They got ways of doing this, as we know, globally.
Are we seeing a conspiracy by the oil companies to put the solar people out of business with this cheap oil, or is this just a reflection of slow growth and more fracking?
It's probably a mix of strategies by the oil companies. When oil prices go down, the stock prices of solar companies plummet because investors think, well, solar is not going to be able to compete with cheap oil and gas. I think part of it is a realization by the oil, gas, and coal industry that the writing is on the wall, and that in another 50 years, they're going to be largely out of business as sources of fuel. It's going to be energy efficiency, all kinds of solar energy, wind power, photovoltaic, solar thermal, geothermal. The writing is on the wall, but they want to hang on as long as possible. As long as they have the OPEC cartel helping them, they'll restabilize the price of oil. But I don't see $100 a barrel oil soon at all.
Finally, I just have one more question I wanted to ask you. This is our Christmas show, and I did use Amazon. I had a glass of Coke last week, and I ordered from Amazon. Bezos had a bond offering. He doesn't have enough money. Amazon is not profitable, and yet they're driving all these mom and pop stores out of business. How does this continue? I mean, when can the Justice Department step in to protect the dying bookstores and record stores?
I don't think they are going to do that, because already Amazon has 40% of the print book market in all America compared to the bookstores and Barnes & Noble and so on, has 60% of the ebook market, and there's not a sign that the antitrust division of the Justice Department is initiating an investigation.
But he's not making money. I mean,
right now he doesn't have to. The key thing about Amazon and what keeps its stock up and what makes it able to borrow money at zero interest almost through bonds, or modest interest rather, is its revenue growth. As long as it keeps up its revenue growth. But if Alibaba and Google and others, Walmart, start expanding online business and immediate delivery, and the revenue starts slowing, as it indicates it is now for Amazon, the stock is starting to slip. And perhaps that's why they're moving to raise more money through their bond offering.
When the Japanese were dumping chips at a loss in the 80s, we moved against that. Is it against the law for a company to drive competition out of business by selling things at such a low price that even they don't make money? Aren't there laws to?
Yeah, there are laws against predatory marketing, but you have to prove intent. You have to prove some document where they had intent to drive out Barnes & Noble by predatory practices, and they don't have that evidence now in the Justice Department.
Well, we've come to the end of another Ralph Nader Radio Hour. Remember, if you have a question for Ralph, go to his Facebook page and ask it, and we go there and we pick them up, and we will mention your name on the air and have Ralph answer your question. So until next time, on behalf of David Feldman and Ralph Nader, I'm Steve Scrovan. Join us again next week for the Ralph Nader Radio Hour.
Stand up, you've been sitting way too long.
From Pacifica, you've been listening to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour, www.nader.org.
Special thanks to John Richard, Matthew Marin.
Our graphic designer is Jimmy Lee Wirt. Our editor is Jimmy Lee Wirt. Our board operator is Jimmy Lee Wirt.
Oh, what the hell. Let's make him our producer.
Our producer is Jimmy Lee Wirt.
And thanks to our executive producer, Alan Minsky.
And most importantly, special thanks to Mr. Ralph Nader, www.nader.org.
Our theme music, Stand Up, Rise Up, is written and performed by Kemp Harris.
If you're listening to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour as a podcast and would like to listen to it as a broadcast,
call your local radio station and say, I want the Ralph Nader Radio Hour.
He's Steve Scrovan.
I'm Steve Scrovan. He's David Feldman.
Until next time.
Say you're tired of trying. You say we have no choice. Say you're just one person, and who will hear your voice? Don't let them fool you. You have the power in your hand. I'm only trying to school you.